Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's so good to see everyone tonight. I'm Chris Berg, and we're here at Spirit of Truth Outreach. And do we have a treat for you? We've been hosting Ray Parrish. He is a AP US history teacher from Greensboro, North Carolina. He's been the U.S. History Teacher of the Year for the state of North Carolina. I've heard him in person on numerous occasions. He is one of my all-time favorite lecturers, and the way that he teaches U.S. history and Christianity and how the Bible and Jesus are intricately woven is absolutely fantastic. We've had him in the studio all day. We've filmed so far 6 videos, which we're going to be editing and bringing to you guys over the course of the next 2 months. So we are extremely excited that he's been in the house, and we're now going to go ahead and invite him up shortly to come and do a live Q&A. So let me go through the rules of how this will work. So Ray's going to come up here in just a moment, and he's going to give a little short introductory message, some things that he believes are vital to understanding history and Christianity. At this point, anytime from now through that point and on, go ahead and in the chat box, post your questions. Now, these questions can be anything about history, about the United States, about the Constitution. He can field questions on, were the early church fathers racist? Or he can view questions on, well, what really is the Constitution? And how does the Constitution play out in terms of checks and balances? Do we need the Electoral College and why? All sorts of questions. If they have the Constitution, U.S. history, if you want to know more about George Washington or Abraham Lincoln or Lee or anybody, I mean, you name it, Ray's got a near encyclopedic knowledge of this stuff. He is fascinating to listen to. But this is going to rely on your questions. So go ahead and start sending those. I'm going to be moderating the questions, so I'll select the ones that I feel like are well phrased and it could spur on good conversation. I will post them to Ray, and then he will begin to answer them one by one, and we'll move through them. After the questions are done, we also are planning a discussion forum on Zoom. So we'll switch back. I'll come back here. I'll open up the Zoom box. We'll text that out to everybody in the chat box. And then we will essentially start a Zoom where Ray is going to basically dialogue with everybody. So we'll be able to have conversation with Ray. And it should be a great time. I'm really excited about this. So one more time, go ahead and start posting your questions about U.S. history, about any of these historical questions you may have, about government, about the Constitution, about the Declaration. If we don't get any questions, I do have some prepped, and I'll be feeding Ray some of those as well. But we'd really love it for those questions come from you guys because, like I said, we want to know what you guys are interested in. So it should be a lot of fun. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and invite Ray Parrish up to the camera, and he'll take it away from there. So thank you guys for joining us here at Spirit of Truth, History Unraveled. And here is Ray Parrish.
Wow. What a great introduction. Chris and the Spirit of Truth, that's for real. Totally amazing. So I am honored. I am happy. I am thankful to be here. Glad to have y'all here. Going to start with a pop quiz. I know you were wondering, like, a pop quiz, what? But don't worry, I'm not going to grade it. You grade it yourself. But it's a math pop quiz, and it's what percentage of what you were taught in high school about U.S. history do you actually remember? And so you can do that really quickly in your head, and I don't want any answers, but I've been doing that for a long time. And most people, it is maybe single digits or so. So let me just give you sort of 3 things that I really want the kids that I teach to remember throughout their life. And it's basically, real quick 3, truth, equality, and we the people. And so just quickly on truth, and I'm not sure, and I love the public schools. I teach the public school I went to, But as far as like truth, and by the way, we're doing sort of a trial system right now where I'll put in an event, and they've really got to look at the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And so, well, how kids do in sort of the truth realm, and what is that? Where does that come from? That's something I love to explore every day in my classes. The next thing, equality, or the word equal. And by the way, I always kind of do this equal because, by the way, this appears, another pop quiz, it appears in, give you 2 seconds to answer it in your head, Declaration of Independence. Also, by the way, 14th Amendment, it also appears there. Equal, in many ways, of course, we know, come on, people are not equal in wealth, grades, GPA, all of that. And yet there it is. And I'll just say, and I'm always looking at my face when I say this, how well I teach. Where does this word equal actually come from? You know, what does it mean? The last one here is, it's we the people. I always do that because I hope if I have any former students, they would say, we the people. Parrish wants us to say, who are the people? We were, of course, under our Mama Britain, and it was all about I the King. And by the way, Yorktown is the big surrender, and the British band may have played The World Turned Upside Down because it went from I the King to we the people. And by the way, that was not a ceremony of, wow, we're proud of them. It's just they are just going to be chaotic and crazy. And so that's a question I love trying to figure out. When we had I the King, you know, I the Caesar, I the Czar for so long, and America turned that upside down, and we're still with that today. You know, who exactly are the people? And so that's been going on throughout American history. And I'll just say, you know, this is human nature. Can people really rule themselves? And that is still sort of out there. So, truth, equal, we the people. Those are kind of my top three that I want the kids that I teach for that won't be in the 99%, hey, I'm just going to forget this stuff. It is big time in their lives. And I guess I'll stop there.
Okay, ready for question one?
I'm ready for questions, yes.
All right. Go ahead and look, Ray. Do you see the...
Oh, yeah, they're up here. I'm sorry.
Spirit Truth Outreach. Do you see the one I posted there?
It'd be... I'm sorry. Sorry, y'all. That one. I see. Okay, here we go. What is the purpose of the Electoral College? Why do we not elect the president through popular vote? What would be consequence if we did? Wow. Great question. You know, let me look at it this way. Let me go back to the Constitutional Convention real quick and talk about our title. A lot of people don't realize this is a weird title, United States. That's just kind of strange. It's like today, United Nations. I don't know if any of y'all do, but most people just kind of ignore the United Nations because a nation is a nation. Well, back then, a state, that's like a nation. And so states got to pretty much be themselves. That's why I love talking about the Constitutional Convention and the miracle at Philadelphia. But there were certainly folks like, say, little Delaware, Maryland, saying, look, just because we're tiny, just because we're little bitty, we're still a state, and we should be equal to you. Well, then, of course, there's the big states led by Virginia, led by Pennsylvania and Massachusetts saying, look, we are much bigger than you. I think Virginia had 747,000 people. And I think Delaware had maybe 50,000, something like that. So we are really, it's we the people. The other side is we the states. And so that led to the compromise of the House is based on the United, the people, and the Senate, it's two. So the way that fits into the Electoral College would be, look, the states, and by the way, at that time, without all this technology, the founders just honestly thought there is no way that the people themselves could even know people from other places, and this is a gigantic republic. So we really have to have this electoral college where the states are all equal as far as two. And then if the more they have in the House, they get that. That obviously is now, there's certainly people saying this. In fact, back in my old We the People teams, that was always a question of ours. So we just go to totally popular vote. And, you know, that idea of the states still matter. Even though throughout American history, the states have dwindled, the idea that the states, even if they're like, I use this analogy, it's like a Chihuahua versus a German Shepherd. And I hope y'all think maybe those are still dogs. You know, they're still two dogs, even though one is little and tiny and nervous and one is big and gigantic. And so right away, that United States title, I think we think, well, duh, that's our title. It shows right away an interesting conflict. And the Electoral College that's an answer to, are we a united or are we a states? Well, we're both. We want to blend those together. I guess that's my answer to that.
And if we were to popular vote, consequences?
Oh, great question. If we did go to the popular vote, it would be the big gigantic states would take over. It would be, how can I sort of say this? I mean, because I don't want to get into the political realm. I don't want to give any opinions, but the idea of the big gigantic states that we have would pretty much dominate this. And the idea that this idea of the Electoral College is a way to spread power out among the states, not to concentrate the power, because power being concentrated in a big city, a gigantic city, that is something, by the way, the founders would be horrified by. If these gigantic cities, they're the ones that controlled everything, that the villages and the farms, that they were part of the We the People as well. So,
right. Question 2.
Question 2 is, I'm sorry, how do I see it again? It's an orange.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry.
It's this one right here.
It's okay. All right.
It's always the last one on there.
Always the last one. I'm sorry. Okay, thank you. Ooh, this is a great one. Were the concepts of God-given, inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness from the Bible or Locke's philosophy? And right away, I'll give you a very quick answer. That's the Bible. It's, Locke himself, and I actually just read a book about John Locke. John Locke is very interesting in that he believed in miracles, and who, by the way, didn't think atheists should have any kind of role to play in government. But John Locke, I do this. I have it's a question that is not to be graded, so they don't have to worry. But I'll ask, so who wrote the Declaration of Independence, which, by the way, that's, the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And I'll put in Thomas Jefferson, the Committee of Five, Continental Congress, John Locke, I always put him there, or God. And by the way, I'll just tell you, God usually does not win that. It's usually, well, it must be Locke. It was Thomas Jefferson. But here we have we hold these truths to be, I'll just say, Jefferson's original version was sacred and undeniable. Ben Franklin, and by the way, sacred and undeniable, all men are created equal, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Ben Franklin comes in and says, oh, you sound too much like a preacher. Let's just make it self-evident. Meaning it's a truth that comes, obviously, from God, a higher power. This is not something that people make up. It's not something you can get by popular sovereignty or just what the people are feeling at the time. These are very God-given. And by the way, to this day, and even back then, life, what exactly is that? Back then in the first half, so, slaves, is it their life and their liberty, or is it their slave master? Which, by the way, this appears in the Fifth Amendment is life, liberty, and property, and later in the 14th Amendment is life, liberty, and property. And so we have that going on with slavery. And in the second half, there's lots out here, but I'll just put in What about the fetus and abortion? What about the life of the fetus? What about, is that the property of the mom? So that is certainly going on. But people sort of arguing about this all the time, saying it's their opinion, their opinion. Try, like I said, truth, where does it come from? And the idea of if truth comes from people, then we're just kind of doomed, because people are always arguing. I use this all the time in my class. They're always wrestling about, well, this is my truth, this is my truth. So to get to an essence of truth, to get to understand the Creator, it's gigantic. But it's a great question. I appreciate that. What was the real motivation for the Civil War? Ending slavery or preservation of Southern states' rights? All right, this is a great question. There's too many great questions. The Civil War, I grew up when I was really tiny. That's the first thing I ever studied, is the U.S. Civil War. And let me just kind of let me try to narrow this down. First of all, the argument is about slavery in the West, and that's an argument. It's not about slavery in the South where it already existed. It's about whether or not when slave owners go west, shouldn't they take their slaves with them? The slaves are property. So that is the argument. And what happens, of course, the election of 1860, and our election is about to happen right now. It's been said, oh gosh, this is the most gigantic election going on in U.S. history. Well, the election of 1860 is absolutely amazing. And what happens is, of course, Abraham Lincoln is gonna win, even though he's not even on the ballot in most of the southern states. And so when Abraham Lincoln wins, there's 15 slave states, and seven decide to secede just because Abraham Lincoln got elected. They're not questioning the election. They're like, look, guys, United States, look, we states, we need to get out of here. Y'all can do your own thing. When Fort Sumter, and I don't want to get too much into that, but when Fort Sumter is fired upon, all of a sudden it starts a war. And here's kind of probably a key, I would say. I don't think anyone realized the kind of war that would happen. Here's the basic, I guess, question here is right away, this war, which is supposed to be tiny. Lincoln calls for volunteers for, I think, 90 days. It'll be a tiny little war, and all we're trying to do is preserve the Union and bring them back into. So the argument is very much, yes, about slavery in the West. That's what the argument is, but the war starts of preserving this idea of secession and the idea of the North saying, no, you got to come back in. No, sorry, we're not. It's united. We're not the states. And what happens during the war, because the war lasts so long, all of a sudden, anti-slavery becomes a part of the war. And by the way, probably the biggest executive order of all time is Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. And that is to take effect in January of 1863. Which, by the way, freed no slaves, because it was only, he's speaking as commander-in-chief, and this only applies to places still in rebellion. By the way, Lincoln said, you can come back into the Union with your slavery intact. So come on back into the Union. And by the way, no Southern state did that. But that started as the Union troops went into still Confederate territories or rebel territories. That is where slaves were released, could become soldiers. And Lincoln himself, I just watched the movie, the Abraham Lincoln movie. He realized this is going to take an amendment to the Constitution, the 13th Amendment, to actually end slavery. Because, by the way, when all this is happening, Kentucky is a slave state. Maryland, Missouri, and Delaware are slave states that are remaining in the Union. And there is no way they want to be part of Lincoln saying, I'm just going to free the slaves everywhere. Lincoln, by the way, says he doesn't have that power. He's only doing that as commander-in-chief. So I'm sorry it's such a long answer, but it's just a great question. The whole battle is starting about an argument about the spread of slavery as this war goes into, I don't know if anyone who thought it was going to be this horrific. Then it becomes a war measure to try to weaken the South and help the North win. I don't want to take away, though, Lincoln there's the reality of this. I use ideals and reality in class. The reality of Emancipation Proclamation, I want to try to win the war. But his ideals, I mean, he saw there's something wrong with slavery. He's about slavery, and he has an amazing evolution in his life in many ways and in many things. But anyway, I'm sorry to speak so long, but I just appreciate it. Thank you. Ooh. Great question. Were the founding fathers generally more in line with deism or Reformed Christianity? The one thing I will dismiss right away would be deism. Right away, for instance, Benjamin Franklin is often seen as a deist. And I won't go into this because it was one of the things we did today, but it is the deist, Benjamin Franklin, who during the Constitutional Convention is going to ask for prayer. It looked like it was falling apart, and he is the guy. And I love talking about it. I'm just going to leave that for later. But I will just say, he's a theist. He certainly wasn't a deist. As far as Reformed Christianity, Gordon Wood is a great scholar from Brown University, and he has said this before. Basically, the founding fathers were Christian. Now, as far as kind of, Reformed Christianity, I wish I had the book, because there's an incredible book about this was just a part of their nature. Like for the Episcopalians, people like George Washington and James Madison, certainly the people from Puritan New England. I mean, the idea of God and Christianity not being a part of the American founding, they would just be puzzled as why anybody would think that. Because when they're going to have launch We the People and who exactly are the people, there's got to be some kind of foundation. And for them, it was basically their family, their community, and the church. They honestly, and by the way, another book I'm thinking about, even if they were kind of sort of Christians, they understood the power of Christianity. They really understood, and how they saw that the people, gigantic number of true believers. And so therefore, whether it was for real, and I think for a lot of them it absolutely was, for others it was politics. Look, these people, you have got to understand the Bible to understand what these people are talking about, and to try to make sure they will follow what you want them to do. So thank you. Thank you. How does a republic turn into a democracy and then socialism? Could you briefly walk us through the major shifts in American history? Great question. Let me start here. A republic is how we would call this. The founders, by the way, the word democracy was considered not a good word. Democracy was, oh gosh, that's directly to the people. And so, oh no, don't let them have too much power. And that is why Madison at the Constitutional Convention is trying to balance the Power Act all over the place. However, and let me just mention a guy who our current president gets compared to. You take out a $20 bill, another pop quiz, Andrew Jackson, who may have been born in North Carolina. North Carolina and South Carolina sort of fight over that. This is when the Republicans, who by the way are the original Democrats, I know this is crazy, but the Jeffersonian Republicans become the Jacksonian Democrats. And this is the first log cabin to the White House president. A guy who was nothing. I mean, a guy whose father died before he was born. So many stories I love to tell about Andrew Jackson. But the people adored him. He became famous from the Battle of New Orleans. He did some crazy things. He was very much a believer. As he went into the presidency, he would say, and I always try to use this, I think, he went into the presidency, he gave a speech that nobody could hear. A lot of these original folks are looking at this mass of people who are coming to see Andrew Jackson. They're like, Andrew Jackson. But they do. They come to see him. They don't hear him, but what he does at the very end is he bows to the people. And the people just, when I tell my kids, that's like the Freebird moment for you Leonard Skinner fans, where you put up your lighter or whatever, because they're like, oh my goodness, he bowed to us. And then, by the way, a lot of those same people kind of trash the White House, just to show how the people themselves can be so kind of crazy. But that is where we get democracy, where the people have more and more power and constant involvement over and over again. Now, the idea of getting towards socialism, let me just launch into, as we get into, I'd just say Woodrow Wilson, Teddy Roosevelt, the idea of the progressive movement, and the idea of, hey, as we go into the world stage and things get more complex, folks, you need the government. That's why, the first half of U.S. history, I'm always telling my kids, hey, their big thing in the first half was, hey, government, get out of our way. You're kind of our problem. So get out of the way. We've got our church. We've got our family. Our community will look after us. In the second half, with the growing economy, with us on the world stage, government gets involved. And I would say, as we go from Woodrow Wilson, World War I, and the progressive movement, then we go to the New Deal and FDR. And I would just say about FDR, he didn't want to establish sort of a welfare system. And he just wanted to try to help the people during this depression. And then comes World War II. The person who really takes off big time would be Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ of Texas, and the Great Society. And that is where you start to see, I would almost describe it as like a fourth branch of government. Like when y'all think of EPA today, or I don't know, can y'all have peanuts on airplanes? I'm not sure we can have peanuts on airplanes. Is that the FCA? Whoever that is, that's not what Congress said. It's just kind of a rule that has been made. And so there's this kind of elite fourth branch who are scholars, who people are saying, we know the best, and so we're going to make rules. So that is where we are on that, and I think there'd be people out there saying, no, we don't want all those rules from a big faraway government. While some of you, I would think, well, no, we need that. These are people trying to do their best. So, the idea of going into a socialistic realm, I think for most of human history, that word itself would just be dismissed. And that kind of is the journey we're on now. Are we going to have the first half of U.S. history making a comeback, where we want to get, I'll just give you real quick last thing here. Two of the most gigantic elections in the 20th century. In 1932 comes FDR, and he is very much, the government is here for you. We're going to look after you. And then in 1980, of course, is Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan's famous quote is, hey, government is not the solution to your problem. Government is your problem. And so I always try to teach in twos, and those are two realms where both sides have a point. But to really research that and go to a realm and try to see, which point do you lean to? Which point is the point that our country now needs? Just a great question. I don't know if I answered it, but I appreciate the question. Is there any warrant for constitutional amendments regulating gay rights, homosexual marriage? What is the role of the Supreme Court concerning this issue? Oh my goodness, this is an incredible question. Let me just say something a little bit about the Supreme Court, which ever since I started the We the People team, I love. I think 3 times I've gone into the Supreme Court while they're in session, and you just stay for just like 3 minutes or so, and then they kick you out. But what the courts were, Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution, the court system was always about 2 people or a group of people or 2 companies. They're there, and there's kind of a fair trial, and so there you go. And what the Supreme Court has become, and by the way, I think it's Woodrow Wilson who said this, the Supreme Court is like a sitting constitutional convention, where they can go in and kind of redefine words like equal, words like life and liberty in the Constitution. And, real quick, I want just the Roe versus Wade case, when that came out in 1973, the big issue was the 14th Amendment, life, liberty, and property. And so, of course, we get to the fetus, call the fetus a baby. And so is it at the life, or is that the property of the mom? And the Supreme Court says, well, hey, that's the property of the mom. So that's a right. Now, what that did, and here's why the Supreme Court is so just, it's just brand new in court history. That was not just that case. And by the way, Norma McCorvey, that's Jane Roe's real name, who, by the way, switched on that later in life. But she had already had the baby. In a normal court system, that is a moot case. It's like, okay, well, you had the baby, so no longer. What they did is kind of legislate from the bench, saying, well, you know what? We are now they're overturning 46 anti-abortion laws in the states. And so, now, by the way, they would say, well, the people like that. And by the way, at the time, the people seemed okay with that. Well, same thing basically with gay rights. And the whole idea of looking and sort of editing the 14th Amendment and trying to understand, which y'all know this is, the First Amendment, I think, the First Amendment of the North Carolina Constitution. So the people of North Carolina voted on an amendment to say, no, gay couples can come together, but not in marriage. However, what the Supreme Court did here is to overturn that. And so the idea that the Supreme Court they edit the Constitution. Now, by the way, this is huge right now. If you are paying attention to, our current president and who is now kind of stepping up. What I will say, if, say, Roe versus Wade or this case is ever overturned, what they will not say, okay, I don't think they will say something like, okay, we now declare that life begins at conception, and so therefore that is a right under the 14th Amendment to life. Antonin Scalia, for a long time on the court, said there's nothing in the Constitution that gives us any power to rule on this. So all he would say, we just need to give this back to the states. This is not. In fact, the Supreme Court has become so supreme. They say, this is us, we're saying it. We have just edited the Constitution, especially the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause. We just want to edit it as it goes. And, I'll just say Sandra Day O'Connor, she also talked about we, the court, want to be in line with what the people want. Which, Scalia would say, we're not politicians. That's not for us. There are plenty of other places within the Constitution and with the states for the people to do that. But it is incredibly easy. Well, I won't say it's easy because I think they get it used to be about 7,000 cases, but they'll pick about 70. But that is a way to just really edit the U.S. Constitution to, it's been done an awful lot since the 1950s is when that really, really started. So thank you.
Anything with the amendment, like they were actually trying to do a full amendment? Like a constitutional amendment?
And I don't know about that.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if I don't know if there was going to be an amendment for that or not. What I know, it's what the Supreme Court did, and that's what a lot of the amendment is such a gigantic process to get through it. Mm-hmm. We've only had the 27 basically, and so it's much, although it's still difficult, it's much easier. Just go to the court and they will edit. They'll amend the Constitution. That's the big thing that a lot of groups now do today. Ooh, great question. Like did the colonies attempt to use biblical justification for the Revolutionary War? Yes. I mean, these are definitely Christians, and I wish I had my notes here because, what's on the Liberty Bell, the verse that's on the Liberty Bell. I do know, America was divided on this, and there were certainly, there were Quakers, there were Loyalists, and there were people saying, look, this is not about warfare. And in a book I read recently, and I'm sorry I don't have the title, but it's about, basically, to answer this question, for the founders themselves, although I would say they're definitely Christians, large majority of them are, but you don't see as much of that biblical language as you do from the community. That the preachers, and there are so many, I've got another incredible, it's a volume of all kinds of sermons from the Revolutionary War era. And it is very much about, this is God's war. And by the war, the war also starts a lot of people, my students think this: we declare independence July 4th, 1776, and then we go to war. The war has already been going on over a year before we declare independence. And by the way, the bloodiest battle of the entire war took place in June of 1775, and that is Bunker Hill. So it took quite a long time for them to get to a realm where they decided to declare independence. And even then, even John Adams says it's 1/3 of the people who really want independence. 1/3 are like, what are we doing? We're taking on the mightiest power on the planet. And 1/3 just, they don't care. They're like, I just want to stay out of it. And so the journey through the revolution, I definitely think there's a Christian realm to it, very much, in which they are saying this is God's war. And this is God looking after his people. And they would say, we are his people. And by the way, they would say, we didn't launch the war. It's the British who've launched it, and we're really trying to defend ourselves. So, great question. Is the Confederate flag something Southerners should shun or take pride in? Well, great question. Let me give you. I grew up. And like I said, I went to the school I now teach at, and I still live in, where I grew up in Oak Ridge, North Carolina. And when I was little, I loved the Civil War. The first history class I gave was actually, it was actually a little history teaching that lasted about maybe 30 seconds. And I was a first grader, and I went next door to the second grader to talk about this war between the North and the South. And I always would talk about it. And I really always saw it. I'll just tell you, kind of from a Southern point of view. I had a great-great-grandfather or something like that. Maybe great-grandfather, whatever it is. And it's interesting to read about him and how he fought. And he was with Georgia at that time. And so to go through his realm. One thing, I ignored Abraham Lincoln. And when I started teaching and this pursuit of truth, and I'm like, I got to be humble. I got to have humility and say, Ray, you could be so wrong about things. And when I started looking at Lincoln and his evolution of what he was like in the American Civil War, and I started to see that basically, like I remember my father gave me I forget what it's called, but it had like the rebel battle flag. And let me just tell you real quick, the battle flag is what's considered so horrible because it's basically the KKK that had it. And I remember we once, my son had a friend of his from his college to come stay with us, an African American. And I looked and I said, I really think I need to take that down. And I took it down. I never put it back up. I'll just say this. The Confederate flag is, it's not something that I would try to show off because I'm always trying to be very Jesus focused. And it's if Jesus would say, look, do you understand the problems you were causing? Just, is that flag really that important? And so I have really gone from a person who used to have, it was just a little, I wish I could say what it was, but it was a little, something that had the battle flag on it. And I've just kind of seen the controversies now. And so I would certainly just say, I wouldn't worship that. I do understand they're on display in places where these are battle flags and they're very interesting to look at. But as a historical thing, okay. as a thing to go out and start to wave, it can just be incredibly dangerous today to do that. So I think to answer that, it's as far as shun, I would just say in a museum, to look at, take pride in, and my answer to that would be no, just because of all the other dangers that it's caused. But that's just kind of opinion on that.
Next one's on there.
Okay. Based on the cycles of empires, we are in an age of decadence. Historically, the last part of any major civilization. What does America do moving forward? That's a great question. Just say this. The founders, they looked at Rome quite a bit. They looked at Rome and the Roman Republic, but then also all of a sudden, of course, the Caesars take over, and it just becomes about entertainment. It just becomes, let's just entertain these people, and they'll, the honor and the virtue is kind of lost. I'll just tell you, the founders were scared of that. They honestly worried that what they were founding would become kind of like that. If I always try to tell the kids, rights, say the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment, was paired with responsibilities. And I think that divorce basically took place post World War II, when rights and responsibilities were divorced. So the whole idea of this, is that where America's headed? I've pondered that myself. Have we lost this idea of truth? Have we lost this idea of, what defines, like the word equal that I was talking about? Who defines that? And that, of course, would be God. This idea of rights being divorced from responsibilities. I tell my kids all the time, I said, I have no idea what America's going to look like in the year, 2842. Or I tell them, when you become a grandmama, grandpapa, and not to hurry them along, but in the year 2070 or 2080, people are going to look back at America, and first of all, the year 2020, but also it's been very recent, about 2 decades, where the world has become more democratic than dictatorial. Most of world history has said these people can't rule themselves. Come on, this we the people thing is crazy. We got to get back to I the king. And if you look around, the whole idea of the selfishness of people, and that they are just, hey, I have divorce rights and responsibilities. Evidence of that. I hope evidence of other folks who are coming, trying to realize we have got to understand that the First Amendment is paired with responsibilities. It's not just a right to do whatever you want to do. So anyway, great, interesting question. Okay. What is the purpose of the senatorial filibuster? Is it a legitimate political tool? What would be the consequence of eliminating it? I'll have to say, I'm not a real expert on this, and I wish I was. I've lost the We the People team, and it's been gone for 3 years, and I know they've sort of changed this whole idea of where the Senate could just keep talking. It used to be just, one guy just talk. And then eventually, of course, the idea of, hey, it's going to take really, the Senate's going to have honestly 60 people instead of a majority. And so I need to research that, because I've been out of political science for a while, and I know that the whole idea of what's happened with the filibuster in the Senate, heard about it recently and trying to understand it. I do know it's not in the Constitution, but it's the Senate who can sort of put things in there and add things. And so anyway, I'm sorry about that. I'm not really great at understanding the modern idea of the filibuster. I'm sorry.
The next one's just a quick comment to see if there's any more questions.
Okay. Yeah. Any other questions?
And Ray, if there's anything you'd like to say, just in brief while we wait and see, and then if not, we'll move on to the Zoom portion.
Wow. Well, wow, these are some great questions. I am so thankful. and they are and by the way, these weren't planted, so I'm like, wow. And I appreciate the questions. I appreciate the depth of knowledge, and I just hopefully, as I teach, I just want to always try to go into incredible depth like that and look at whole idea of can we the people really rule themselves? And a lot of these questions are about can the people really do this? And I think I tell the kids we're still in that experiment. It's still going on. Is how can this be done? How can it be done better? And I would just say the whole idea of trying to bring back together the idea of having a right, but that was always paired with responsibility. Just a quick thing on this about women voting, just real quick. There was not a huge women vote movement at all, because, by the way, the right to vote was paired with the responsibility of defending your country. And so the reason women early on wanted any kind of voting power was because they wanted power to look after others. I'll just say this real quick. The two gigantic movements in American history would be a civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s and the original women's movement. And this was mostly about folks who understood we want power not just for ourselves, but we want to look after others. I mean, women very much wanted to look after others, and they were, like Dorothea Dix and the middle institutions that she established. And so women wanted power not for themselves, but to look after others. I think a lot of rights movements that I've explored ever since the We the People team, they are very self-centered movements. They're just movements about, I'll just tell you real quick, well, the last thing I promise. I grew up Oak Ridge, North Carolina, Fogman Road, in the mid-1970s. I don't know if you've heard about it. I started a children's rights campaign. Sorta, I had a crush on a little girl next door named Cheryl Holt, and she was my vice president. But I have no idea what that was. It was just rights. Just rights. It's just, wow, I got to have a children's rights campaign to get something. I don't know what it was. And so the rights movements, and I've got songs that I play for that for my students. But I got a right to this, a right to try to recover, the honor and the virtue, which are two words that used to be very common. And now when you say honor, kids I teach a lot of them, oh, that's the honor society, and that'll help me get into college. So I really try to get the word honor, the word virtue, to put that into the vocabulary, the understanding that if this We the People thing is going to make it, it's going to have to be built on honor and virtue. And I just say the Bible. I'll just say America's number one religion. Christ has to be the true boss in all of this. So I think that's it.
Cool. We have two more.
Oh, we have two more.
And then we're going to do some others. I'm going to hit this one now, and then we're going to, some of these other ones we might be able to do in the discussion, just because they're more general questions. But there's two more that are really solid government ones. So here's the first one.
Okay. Right at the bottom?
Yep, right at the bottom.
Oh my goodness, this is so gracious. How has separation of church and state, as far as the federal government's view, changed? Okay. We used to talk about this so much in my, this makes me miss my We the People teams, because, by the way, I'll just start with the words separation, church, and state are not found in, of course, the First Amendment in the Constitution. It starts, Congress shall make no laws respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's all it says. That actually comes from a letter from Thomas Jefferson to the Danbury Baptist, I think in 1806. And he is the one that puts this in, separation church and state. After World War II, the Supreme Court comes in. It says, we got this. We know how to separate church and state. Now, all it meant originally was there can't be a national church. Like there was a Church of England, which was very much, with the government. So all this is saying is we are not going to have a Church of the United States. So what has happened, as America has become more diverse, there are just so many cases here that I'm thinking of let me make sure I got this. Wow. What the Supreme Court has to kind of figure out, like I'm thinking of what goes on in, high schools and what happened with schools themselves, and how basically in the early 1960s the Supreme Court is going to say, well, a prayer, and if you ever read this prayer from the New York schools, it is really vague. There's not much to it, but the Supreme Court says, that is basically it's violating the separation of church and state. And so there's so many cases about the public schools, about all kinds of areas of when in a public area can you have the manger, and when can you not? I'm sorry, there's so many cases here. I'll just say this is such a dilemma for the U.S. Supreme Court. And by the way, Scalia, I adore Antonin Scalia. And Scalia goes back to the original. It's like, guys, did they establish, a national church? Did they they didn't, smash other churches? Then it's them. It's the state or the community to figure that out. It's not for us, the justices, to start editing the First Amendment and the whole idea of, that never mentions the words separation of church and state. So I hope I wish I had my notes on the Supreme Court cases, because we used to use that all the time in our We the People team, because it's just an incredible, and by the way, I'll just say this about the Supreme Court. They're always, I use this all the time, wrestling each other. They're always, it's usually like a 5-4 decision. I mean, they don't even get it exactly. And times later, the minority on the Supreme Court comes out, and who knows if that's going to happen eventually with Roe versus Wade, if the original minority of 1973 is going to come back and become the majority. This just shows this cycle of We the People. And, opinion is such a gigantic thing. And I just wish, I just wish truth was the gigantic thing. They were constantly searching truth and asking the kids, what is that? What does it mean? How do we get it? Where does it come from? How important is it in my life? So anyway, great question. I'm not even sure if I answered it, but.
Okay, and then one more at the very bottom. Do you want to look for it?
Oh, I see one above the one I just did. Who's your favorite historian author?
Oh, well, that one we're going to do during the Q&A.
Oh,
just
cool.
This is, yes, or you could answer that now too. I guess I was going to post that one right there. Oh no, actually.
Yeah, that's the one.
Wait, hold on. This one right here.
Oh.
Do that one.
Oh. I know who this is. I don't know if I can say their name. This is so sweet. Do you feel that the U.S. could ever legitimately become more than a two-party system in the modern day? Let me see. I was talking with some peers, and a lot of us feel that neither. Oh boy, it's a great question, and we've had to face this, and We the People a long time. Europe mostly has lots of different parties, and the parties will merge. But this is interesting, where now people are saying, ugh, the party system. I'll just start by saying the founders hated the whole idea of a party system. I mean, the founders were just, no, there can't be some kind of permanent party system where people pledge to their party above the Constitution, above We the People, above the people of the United States. And so how the party has become sort of just a fixated, look, we just follow our party. Whatever our party says, that's what we're going to do. And so I've always got to go back to the founders and would say they would love to see the parties go away. It doesn't look like that's happening, although I will say it looks like more and more people now, and this is what I think is kind of cool, are registering. It's the highest ever since they've been doing this, registering as unaffiliated, independent, whatever the words are, which I don't belong to a party. And so more and more people are doing that. And that would be very interesting if that's going to happen, and that eventually these two parties will separate. People have been there have been third parties that come and go, but it just seems like what parties normally do is they sort of do this, and they like, here's what the people want. Now remember, the people are divided. So they're always like, well, my people want this, my people want this. And so I know for a long time people had been wondering, can't we have a lot of different parties? Normally, I'll just say the big one is the Populist Party of the 1890s. It's the first big, gigantic sort of third party. You know what? They were absorbed by the Democrats. The Democrats took them over, saying, wow, there are populists out there. These are people looking after the farmers. We'll take them. So just a great question. Awesome question. So I appreciate that.
All right, we'll let the rest for Zoom. Unless, well, I guess go ahead and share your favorite historian author. We can do that one real quick.
Okay. Ooh, another. Wow, this is awesome. Oh my goodness, my favorite historian and author. That's a great question. Hang on. I took my books down to the van. You know, the first name that comes to mind right away is a guy named Gordon Wood, who is just a really interesting person. And I got to be in a workshop with him in Mount Vernon and got to talk to him quite a bit. And he's won all kinds of prizes, and he's probably seen as the guy when you're looking at the American Revolution. And one thing I remember about him is he did say, when I was asking a question, he's the guy that said, look, the founders were Christians. You know, not that they were, say, Christians a lot of us might think of, but Christianity was so embedded in them. And so here is an Ivy League professor just saying, we can't call them deist. They're certainly not atheist. And so, I've always loved Gordon Wood. I'm thinking of, there are so many that I can't think of their names or the title of their books. Because I know there are others out there that I'm just leaving this behind. And I wish I could. Oh gosh, hang on. I got one I love. Mark Knoll. Does Mark Knoll sound familiar to you?
Yeah, Mark Knowles, he's the Christian historian guy. Yeah, I've read a couple of his books.
I have grown to adore Mark Knoll, who I think is at Notre Dame. And he probably leads the way of the scholars and where I went, the professors I had, where, hey, these are deists, or we just don't even mention God. He is doing a fascinating job. He's written several books of starting basically in 1492 when Columbus sailed the ocean blue, all the way up through the founding. And he is where I'm getting a lot of my information of, look, Christianity was gigantic in this time period. And the idea of going back to to talk about Jesus, when they ask him about paying taxes, they're going to trap him. And when he says, of course, give to Caesar what is Caesar, give to God what is God. Right away, and that's kind of a separation of church and state. That's interesting. And that is where you start to see America, by the way, has so many churches, you couldn't have a national church. However, their agreement on, when we talk about, and I tell my kids, death and sin are the two things human beings have never been able to solve. Benjamin Franklin says death and taxes. And I say, well, taxes because you need government, because people are sinful. But of course, and I'll get here eventually to my students, I hope, but the only real solution to sin and death would be the crucifixion and the resurrection. And that's why I just love talking about the end of the Civil War, which ended on Easter. So I don't want to get into that because I'll say way too much. But anyway, these are great questions. I appreciate y'all all to pieces. Oh yeah, thank you.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, give it to Ray. That was exceptional, Ray. Thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and set up the Zoom call real quick. If the camera dies, it's just because it's out of battery, but I'll still be talking here to help you set this up. Feel free, come and join us on Zoom. You'll get to talk with Ray in person and have a conversation. We'll maybe go 15, 20 minutes or so if you'd like to join us for that. Again, a big round of applause for Ray here from your homes. Additionally, I just wanted to say thank you for those who don't join us on Zoom. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight. Thank you, Ray, for joining us here tonight. This has been a special treat and an honor to have him here. Thank you all. I know we have a lot of guests tonight as well. Thank you so much for checking us out. We do sermons, we do apologetics, we do theology, and we do special guests like Ray, who we just love to have in. Like I said, we're going to be posting a number of videos from Ray over the next couple of months, and hopefully have this be an ongoing relationship. So with that, I'm going to go ahead now, post in the link and the password, and I'll wait a little bit to make sure we get everybody in, and then I'll go ahead and close out the YouTube. But again, thank you so much for joining us, and feel free and join us for the Zoom. I hope you guys have a great night, and we'll see some of you here in just a moment.
One of my cousins.
Okay, and so there is the Zoom link and the password, and I will be bringing people in as we go. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and close the live chat. But again, the links will still be there, so just go ahead and click on those if you'd like to get in. Other than that, guys, have a wonderful night.